Hi there. So I'm going to do a quick video explaining my take on the whole ABSA Bankorp situation. Yeah. So first question is, who is Bankorp? So Bankorp was, many of you know, was a large bank in the 80s. They had about 10% of the market share in South Africa. Bankorp had, the shareholders of Bankorp were Sanlam, which owned 88%, and then various other minority parties which owned a 12% stake in Bankorp. And so, what did Bankorp consist of? Consisted of assets of 1.63 billion rand. So those assets were in the form of loans to various customers, and then its liabilities consisted of depositor funds. So as you know, banks are in the business of taking depositor funds. So your mom and your dad, they deposit their money in the bank, and then the bank then takes that money and uses it to, and gives it out as loans to customers and gets interest on that. And that's, So that is Bankorp in a nutshell. Okay, so that's step one, right? Now we know that Bankorp was a large bank in South Africa, one of the largest with a 10% market share. So next question is, okay, so what exactly was the problem? So the main problem was that Bankorp's customers, to whom they gave loans, could no longer afford to repay their loans. Now the problem here is that, so this is Bankorp's main revenue stream, right? These loans to these customers. So pretty soon, so your mom, your dad goes to the bank, right? Their initial deposit has been given as a loan to a customer. They want to withdraw some money, say to pay your school fees. That money is not there, but Bankorp relies on the fact that those interest payments are coming in regularly, and it'll say, okay, fine, so you don't want all your money, you want some of it, so here's some of the money here. Problem is, when these guys stop repaying their loans, Bankorp's got a bit of a problem now, because when you try to get your money, you can't get your money. Eventually word gets out that, hey, we can't get our money from Bankorp, there's a bit of a problem, right? So this bank can no longer continue operating as a bank. Then other people hear about this. So first of all, 10% of all people at the bank can't be affected by this is quite a big problem. An even bigger problem is though that customers of First National Bank and Standard Bank, other banks, they hear about this problem going on and they're like, well, I'd also like to get my money back because I don't want to end up like a Bankorp customer, and then next thing you know, you've got to run in the banks. Very bad for the whole, very bad for the whole system. So the state decides we need to step in. This bank is too big to fail. You may have heard that term before. So Bankorp was back then too big to fail. So the state decided to step in and rescue this bank. Okay, so now that we've determined that the main problem was, making sure Bankorp doesn't fall apart, what was the solution? Okay, cool. So at this point, this is 91 now. The parties involved in the bailout are the South African Reserve Bank, whose mission is to ensure the integrity of the South African banking system. You have the Treasury that's involved, see that in a bit, and then you have Bankorp. Cool. So effectively they enter into a structure that has 3 legs up front, or 2 legs up front, sorry. Okay, so Bankorp at this time, so we know they've got 1.6 billion in distressed assets and some unknown amount in customer deposits. And the state's moving in because they say, well, we're going to effectively protect these customer deposits. And thereby protect the whole banking system. So they say to them, okay, cool, we are going to give Bankorp a loan. This is what the Treasury saying. Oh, sorry, this is the South African Reserve Bank says we are going to give Bankorp a loan. So they give them a 1.5 billion rand loan at 1% interest. Cool. So now Bankorp has a 1.5 billion rand liability. in and of itself kind of useless up front because it's an extra cost they can't really afford to pay. So what they do with this 1.5 billion rand though is that they invest it. So they split that into two legs. So they buy 1.1 billion rand worth of treasury bonds, and I think those are like, actually I'm not sure what the term on those are, but either way, this 1.1 billion rand worth of bonds pays them 16% interest, and they also put a deposit with the South African Reserve Bank of 400 million rand. And I haven't seen it explicitly stated anywhere, but in order for their math to make sense, the assumption is that this 400 million rand this 400 million rand deposit was also placed at 16%. Okay, cool. So what does Bankorp have now? So Bankorp now has this income stream which comes out to, well, first of all, I'll take a step back. So what's happening now is that Bankorp needs to pay, Bankorp needs to effectively pay the state or South African Reserve Bank 1% interest on 1.5 billion rand periodically, and they receive from Treasury 16% interest periodically. So they decide, okay, cool, let's enter into a netting agreement, right? That netting agreement states that, okay, cool, I owe you 1%, you owe me 16%, let's settle on, you owe me 15%. And the value of that 15% works out to, it was like 225 million, yeah. That was a number down somewhere here. Yeah, works out to 225 million rand a year. Now, the agreement is that Bankorp can't take this 225 million rand a year and say, woohoo, shareholders, here you go, dividends. No. This 225 million rand a year can only be used to basically subsidize that income they're getting because these loans are, yeah. So these loans effectively, I don't know if non-performing is the right word because it has legal consequences, but yeah, these loans, yeah, are no good. So this 225 million rand a year, it supplants that income. Cool. And so now, under the terms of the agreement, right, what's supposed to happen is that at the point in time where Bankorp is on stable ground again, when this whole transaction unwinds, effectively what's supposed to happen is that, okay, so you have 1.1 billion in treasury bonds, and at some point in time these bonds are going to mature, meaning so under the terms of the bond, Bankorp lent money to the state, and the state said, okay, cool, so lent money to Treasury, and the Treasury gave Bankorp a note and said, okay, we're going to pay you an amount, yeah, we're going to pay an interest rate on this thing, right? So at the end of the period, Bankorp takes this note, give it back to Treasury, and Treasury then gives them 1.1 billion rand. So if you take, so then Bankorp does two things. One, they take that 1.1 billion rand and they use it to partially repay this initial 1.5 billion rand loan. So now, cool, they only owe 400 million rand to the SARB under the terms of the agreement, and they repay that 400 million rand by saying that 400 million rand deposit we initially pledged the SARB, we now cede to you. Okay, cool. So in essence, Bankorp's assets and liabilities, well, part of the assets and liabilities cross out, and the initial entity Bankorp is left with assets and liabilities, by which time hopefully they would have transformed that into that, thus saving the whole banking system. This was the idea. Okay, so final step. If you stuck with me this long, thank you. We're in the final lap now. So, this is where ABSA comes in, right? before this whole deal expires, right? So before Bankorp decides it is now sort of afloat, no longer needs government assistance, but sort of like, you know, it's midway into this deal really, ABSA steps in, right, and says, we would like to buy Bankorp. And what ABSA does is, okay, so they look at this bank and they say, okay, they say, what do we have here? So they've got some distressed assets and they've got some liabilities, okay, which is those customer deposits, right? But they've also got a second group of assets and liabilities which are effectively ring-fenced here. So what they have here is they've got, in terms of liabilities, they've got this loan from the SARB, and then they've got some treasury bonds and a SARB deposit, right? And so we've got some assistance effectively over here, which is that net interest figure, which is that 15%. So they've got this 225 million rand coming in every year, really, to sort of to help offset some of the damage done by these bad loans over here. So ABSA says, cool, let's try to put a price tag on this whole thing. So remember, Bankorp is now owned by Sanlam and these various partners. So they go, ABSA looks at this thing and says, we think together this part of the bank here is worth 105 million rand. And then they say, okay, and then we're also getting this part of the bank, right? So this, but when we buy it, sure, we're getting these bonds and this deposit, but we're also taking on this liability. So these parts actually effectively cancel each other out, because even though ABSA is going to get some cool assets, they've still got a liability, that 1.5 billion rand loan at 1% that they're still going to have to pay back. Cool. But another thing they put a value on though is they say, well, that 225 million rand, right, is actually sort of saving this bank. If it weren't for that, we'd only pay 105 million rand for this bank if it weren't for the structure over here. And so the value of that is 1.125 billion. That's the so-called interest figure referred to, which is actually, it's not really interest in a particular sense, it's income received by Bankorp from these assets. That is what is valued at 1.125, 1.1 billion rand. So that's that income over a 5-year period. Cool. And then they say, ABSA says, okay, so in total, we're going to pay 1.23 billion rand for Bankorp. And they pay that money to the shareholders of Bankorp. So so the shareholders of Bankorp get 1.23 billion. So i.e. Sanlam and these various minority partners get this money. So in my view, what they should have done perhaps, so one thing that they could have done perhaps is taken this 105 million rand and split it amongst themselves, a healthy profit. They said, well done boys, good job all around, let's go for a drink. 105 million rand, not a bad figure. And then taken this 1.125 billion and said, and perhaps handed it back to the state and said, okay, cool, this is the monetary value of this assistance, but technically belongs to the shareholders of South Africa, so here, have this money back, thank you very much. We're very grateful that you allowed us to continue running long enough to make 105 million rand. Thank you. I'm not sure what they did with the money, but yeah, another question altogether. So ABSA now gets all of this, and they inherit Bankorp, and they also inherit this agreement. And basically they stick to the agreement, okay? So they have, so they continue getting, so they get a portion of this of that benefit, the 225 million rand, but remember they've paid for it, right? So they've paid for the past benefit and the future benefit in that 1.1 billion, this portion that ABSA paid for, it's the past benefit and the future benefit they were going to get, right? So they've paid for it. At the end of this deal, more or less what happens is that these bonds mature. Treasury gives ABSA now, the owners of Bankorp, so we can call this now Eek. There we go. Bankorp is no longer existent, so until he's red, but yeah. The amalgamated banks of South Africa. So, Treasury gives ABSA 1.1 billion rand. ABSA has been continuing to pay, by the way, 1% on this loan the whole time, right? They say, okay, cool, it's time to settle this loan and no longer have to pay this 1% anymore. So they say, here's 1.1 billion rand. They say they give it to the SARB, and the SARB says, cool, you still owe us 400 million. And they say, but remember we have the deposit of 400 million rand with you guys, and we cede that to you. Okay, cool. So under the terms of this agreement, ABSA is paid in full, right? ABSA as an entity they've paid their 1% the whole time, and whatever benefit they receive, they've effectively taken cash from their shareholders and says, hey, this is what the people of South Africa gave to Bankorp, we're giving it back to the shareholders, Sanlam and these other partners. So when the public protector says ABSA repaid 1.5 billion without interest, that's not true. They paid their 1%. And in terms of the benefit derived from this whole bailout structure, they've paid for that already. So go ask Sanlam where the money is. Maybe Sanlam should pay back the money. Maybe whoever those guys are, those various partners, maybe they should be repaying the money. Yeah. For the record, I did not work for ABSA, I never worked for ABSA, I never applied for a job at ABSA. Thank you for watching. Okay, cool. This is kind of like the post-credit scenes in a Marvel movie. In terms of like, I guess, yeah, technicalities that I suppose I'd like to address. Is that, okay, so the first technicality is regarding when this whole structure sort of matured. So, when the structure matured, so the whole deal was supposed to sort of expire, i.e. ABSA no longer needed this assistance in October of 1995. Although these bonds, though, which are sort of central to the structure, were set to mature in, I think, early in 95. So probably about Feb or something, Feb, March, around that period, they were set to mature. So effectively, in order to keep this whole thing going, these bonds would have to be repurchased, i.e. the Treasury gives back the money to ABSA, and then ABSA goes and repurchases that in order to continue getting that 16%, that would offset that 1% and result in a net benefit of 15%. What happened instead was, yes, the overall spirit of the structure was maintained, but what happened was that Treasury gave back the money. So now what ABSA had was, I think this one, they got the 1.1 billion in cash with them now, and they had like 400 million rand in deposits sitting with the SARB. So they took that money basically. I think they made this into so basically now they've got 1.5 billion rand in deposits in total. So they deposit this money with the SARB, but at that same sort of interest rate. And then the SARB took that 1.1 billion rand and went and invested it in treasury bonds. So they bought treasury bonds. So that's 16% that the SARB is now paying for this very short period over to ABSA. They're getting from those treasury bonds. So they're getting 16% from the treasury, and they're paying it over as 15% to ABSA, because ABSA already owes them 1%. And then when the whole structure's at the end of October, or near the end of October, October 95, when this whole structure is meant to wind up, 1.5 billion in deposits is now ceded over to the SARB, and ABSA has still met all of their obligations. ABSA has not they've not disadvantaged the state or the shareholders in any way. Questions need to be directed at Sanlam. I guess the reason why I didn't include this in the main section is because yeah, it doesn't really affect the spirit of the deal. Still went on as intended. And again, if I've gotten anything wrong in this whole video, given that I'm not an accountant, please let me know. Yeah, so write something in the comments, and if it's really big, and I might even do like a response video or something like that after the fact. So thank you for listening. Yep.